Hi, Misha here, and another batch of the Agostini 172 scale diecast models finally made it over. These are pretty inexpensive little models that are imported from Japan, and they're kind of based on the old IXO tooling, although they have made some improvements and introduced even newer models. And while they're not maybe the best in the world as far as detail and whatnot, they do a lot of interesting aircraft that the big guys maybe don't do. For example, this here, the Japanese Army Type 5 fighter, known as the Ki-100 from Kawasaki. And these models do have some features. They do come with a stand with the name on it. We do get a rotating propeller. We do get gear up or down. And on some of them you have removable ordnance or tanks, but on these they're permanent. And they're reasonably made of metal. The fuselage and the wing are metal, with the major plastic being the tail. But that's alright. No pilot or real cockpit detail. So if you've never heard of the Ki-100, that's not surprising. This was a very late war development and almost a substitute aircraft because of the end of the war, but really it produced a very good aircraft, if not great. And they would manage to produce quite a reasonably high number considering how briefly it was in production. But really, the Ki-100 was this plane here, the Ki-61, known as the Tony, although sometimes also called the Mike. This was unique in the Japanese Army. Really all of their other fighters used a radial engine. This used a liquid-cooled inline engine, which was originally just a copy of a German design. Originally, it used when the Kawasaki designed it, it used the Ha-40. But this engine proved difficult to manufacture during wartime, so the next version would use the Ha-140, which, while easier to manufacture and mass produce, suffered from reliability issues. It was a little faster than the original engine too, but it wasn't as reliable, and it suffered from kind of sloppy wartime production. So they didn't have the greatest luck with this aircraft. Unlike a lot of other Army fighters, this one focused more on armament and armor and climb speed and dive speed than it did maneuverability, turning, what have you. It had several versions. There were some that had the couple of 7.7mm machine guns and a couple of 12.7mm, which are 50 cal. But later, a version would come out with two 20mm cannon in the fuselage and then two 12.7 machine guns in the wings. And then after that, there were even some made with four 20mm cannon. It had a top speed of about 360 originally miles per hour. This would be up to nearly 380 with the second version. And thanks to its inline engine, it had a maximum altitude of over 38,000 feet. It was nearly 29.5 feet long with a wingspan of nearly 39.5 feet. It typically carried two fuel tanks under the wings, but it could carry a couple of 550-pound bombs. This could operate as a fighter, and did. In fact, the first time it was deployed was during the Doolittle raid in 1942. These were prototypes, actually. And then it started to see service in 43 as a fighter, but they had some reliability problems with the Ki-61, which continued into 1944. And that year, it started to be used more as an interceptor against increasing B-29 and other bomber raids. And the airframe was pretty good. It did well against the P-40, even the P-47. But it really suffered from reliability issues which stemmed from its engine. So around October of 1944, the Japanese army decided to take the Ki-61 and basically substitute out the inline liquid-cooled engine for a radial engine. And work started to begin on converting a couple of prototypes for this. But then this became very important when in January, I think it was January 19th of 1945, the factory that was making the Ha-140 engine was bombed out of existence. So the plane didn't have an engine. On top of that, they had around 275, maybe 280 Ki-61s ready to go, fully built by Kawasaki, but no engines to put in them. So they kind of fast-tracked dropping a Mitsubishi engine in, which would turn out to be the Ha-112. And this first flew on February 1st, 1945, and testing would commence through March and April. And they quickly found that it was a pretty good aircraft. It was more maneuverable, try to move you a bit, than the inline. The nice thing is the new engine was lighter, over 100 pounds lighter, and because of changes that they could make and equipment they could remove, the airplane was over 700 pounds lighter. They would keep the same armament, two 20mm cannon with 200 rounds each, and two 50 cal machine guns, or virtually 50 cal, okay, 12.7, in the wings with 250 rounds each. Top speed would be a little bit slower at about 370 miles per hour, and maximum altitude would suffer about 36,000 feet. And that's the other place it would suffer. The engine gave good power, good performance at medium altitude, but once you went over into higher altitudes, it did begin to choke. And this was the whole reason for using an inline engine in the first place for an interceptor, was the high altitude performance to go against the B-29 and what have you. But, you know, needs must. But again, there were benefits. Better turning, it was more maneuverable, had very good dive performance, and most importantly, it was more reliable. The Ki-100 was infinitely more reliable than the Ki-61 and even the Ki-84. And it just was put together better. Better electrical systems, better aircraft, easier to handle. It was easier to take off and land with. Some of the other Japanese planes could be a little challenging, especially considering most of their trained pilots were dead. So yeah, it was relatively easy to fly, especially for what it was. It was well armed. It inherited the same self-sealing fuel tanks and armor for the pilot and bulletproof windscreen from the Ki-61. And so yeah, there were a couple of prototypes made. Then they would take those 275 Ki-61s, modify them as needed, turning them to Ki-100s. So the first production models were re-engined Ki-61s. And this would first see combat on March 9, when it was used to fight against a night raid from B-29s. And it enjoyed some small use throughout the month, not taking its first casualty until April 7 of 1945. And even then, it was doing very well. After the first batch was done with, I think the final airframe was converted and re-engined and was delivered in June. they would decide to produce more Ki-100s. This would be the 1B model, and these would be purpose-built. Virtually the same aircraft, except that it was a little bit slimmed down and shortened in the fuselage in the back here, meaning that it was slightly shorter, a little under 29 feet long. Same wingspan though. And it had a slightly improved windscreen cockpit layout as well. So a few minor things. But they would only build about 118. The peak month of production for the Ki-100 would be May 1945. Then it would start to drop off. Already by July, only 23 were delivered, and then by August, 10. This is, for obvious reasons, the way the war was going. But that said, it was still used. It would not only be used as an interceptor against bombers, it would go up against the P-51, the P-47, and the Navy's F-6F Hellcat throughout June and July, and acquit itself very well. Yeah, of course they took losses, but they also took Allied fighters down with them. Again, it was a very good aircraft. Maybe not great, certainly not revolutionary, but it solved most of the issues that had plagued the Ki-61, and the trade-off, the things that kind of lost out to, yeah, were basically worth it. I mean, reliability